else, it makes me feel a little better about what I do.
Welcome everyone to the Ranchers Thursday Lunchtime Series. Thank you for joining us. We're going to have a good turnout here today and excited for our special guest and our presentation. Don't forget, as we go along, if something comes to mind, you'd like to ask a question, don't be bashful about typing that into either the chat or the Q&A area. Either of those will work fine. Also, remember, you can access the archived videos of these Ranchers Thursday Lunchtime Series. This is series number 15, actually, and we're up to somewhere in the neighborhood of around 75 of these sessions recorded at our website at beef.okstate.edu. Most of you will recognize Dr. Mark Johnson. He's going to serve as our host here today. Mark is a faculty member here in Animal and Food Sciences with an extension and a teaching appointment. Mark is now world famous for his appearance on the Sun Up television show in the Cow Calf Corner segment. So Dr. Johnson, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, David. It's good to be with you all today. And particularly it's great to get to talk with James Henderson, Bradley 3 Ranch down in Texas. And our topic today that James is going to elaborate on is tough conditions require tough cows. And James, I'm going to let you do most of the talking, but as we get started here, just a little bit of preface. We're talking about a purebred seed stock operation. We're talking about Charolais and Angus cattle in that operation. And I think a lot of what you guys do is going to be top of mind awareness to all of us that have been living through droughts and tough conditions, and is definitely on our mind. So we talk about tough environments require tough cows. James, what's our lead in on that topic?
Well, I think probably most of us think we have tough environments, and and I get to visit with a lot of cattle people around, and everybody certainly has challenging circumstances, no matter where we are. But we've kind of been through all segments of this business. We've owned a feed yard, a packing plant, sold a branded beef product nationwide, but it all comes back to that factory of the cow. If that cow is not functioning in our environment, then the rest of it doesn't really matter. And so we've spent, the ranch was purchased in 1955. The first Angus cattle were brought on the ranch in 1957. So we've spent over 65 years trying to develop these cattle for this environment. And there's certainly tougher environments than we have, and a lot of our customers are in that tougher environment. But it's a pretty tough environment. We have temperature extremes. We've gone from -10 to 123 degrees here on the ranch. We've had as little as 9 inches of rainfall in 18 months. Our water is very high in sulfates and nitrates, and there's cattle that come in from the outside a lot of times won't drink it. We've been on a 20-year plan to get to where there's no more than a half a mile to water anywhere on the ranch, and it took us about 25 years to get that 20-year plan done. But we're down now to where they don't have to walk more than a half a mile to water anywhere on the ranch. We've got a lot of brush, both mesquite and junipers, and we would have a number of toxic plants, probably loco being the primary one of those. And then a tremendous amount of predators. We've been on a trapping program the last couple of years, and we've trapped over 125 coyotes a year, just trying to get those gone. So, that kind of lays out the premise of the environment that we're in. And like I say, I know there's plenty of challenges everywhere, but but those are quite a few to deal with at one time.
I would agree. And you know, it's interesting as we get started in this discussion. We talk about it in our teaching, our extension programming. I know Dr. Lallman has got an active research project going on, but we talk about the importance in the beef industry and the cow-calf business that we have cows that are adapted to their environment. And if we think about North American beef production, those production environments vary a great deal. You've talked some about your environment. How do you guys go about selecting for and generating the cow herd that works in that environment?
Well, we collect a tremendous amount of data. Everybody will tell you that I'm a data nerd, and I've got a spreadsheet on every cow that we own. That I think I looked the other day, and I was out to column FZ on that spreadsheet of data points for those cows. You know, I can pretty well tell you, in fact, the guys here on the ranch are usually amazed. They can come in and start talking about a cow, and I can look at the data that I have and describe the cow to them pretty well without ever going out there to look at the cow or the situation, because I've got enough data points to do that. And I've taken enough phenotypes that I pretty well know when they start to describe something to me, what that cow looks like and what's going on. And that's where it really all starts. We have to understand that every one of those cows is an individual factory.
So how would you describe, well, some of your selection criteria? How do you do some embryo transfer work? How do you guys identify a donor cow in that production environment at Bradley Ranch?
Our donor cows are typically 11-year-old cows that have had no more than a 370-day calving interval in their productive life. Most of the time, they will have been numerous time Pathfinder cows. So we would have some of those cows that would have made Pathfinder 5 times in their lifetime, which means they're weaning ratioing at least 105 on weaning weights with those calves in that kind of a calving interval, and have survived all of these extremes. And then we think she's qualified to be a donor cow.
Any other criteria go into that donor cow selection? Is there genetic values that you take into account on that?
Well, you know, yes, there are, but that's not really our driving criteria for selecting that. Obviously, we're going to try to pick the best with EPDs and production records and those kinds of things of those cows. But you know, by the time you get one that fits that 11-year-old cow with that kind of a calving interval that has made numerous times a Pathfinder, that gets down to a pretty narrow group of cows.
I would imagine it does. What does that cow look like? What's her mature size? What's her udder quality? How do you describe her?
Well, our cows the last several years, and we weigh cows when we do take our 205-day weights of our calves and preg check the cows. We weigh the cows at that point. Our average weight's been right around 1190 on our cows. That cow's going to be, you know, we don't keep cows with bad udders, bad feet, those kinds of things, because they'll tend to break down pretty quick in our country. So they've got to travel a lot. They've got to be able to cover a lot of country to get to both forage and water. And so she's going to be able to move pretty freely, be a pretty good athlete. She's going to weigh a little less than 1,200 pounds, and she's going to have really level udder and pretty small teats.
And in those kind of cows, James, what what are we talking about as far as the weaning weights? You've talked about some of those ratios and what they've got to achieve there, but what kind of weaning weights are you going to see out of those cows over that productive lifetime?
We expect those cows, our average of the cows is that they wean about 56% of their body weight. So again, you know, we try not to keep a cow. There will be some years like last year, for instance, where we didn't see any green and we had a half-inch rain on the calves back from the time they were born until they were weaned. So we didn't quite have every cow wean 50% of her body weight last year, but I think the average was right at 51% of their body weight last year. But that's a pretty extreme year with a half-inch of rain from the time the calf was born until they were weaned.
So you're still seeing 600 to 700 pound weaning weights on those cows. That mature weight's not quite 1,200.
Yes.
Yes. And along the way, what kind of culling criteria do you guys practice on those cows once they get in production?
Well, the biggest part of it is breeding and breeding quickly. We're turning bulls out 45 days, picking them up on the 45th day. We're doing that in January and February, so that would be our toughest time of the year nutritionally for the cow. And if she's open, it doesn't matter how many good calves she's had or those kinds of things. If she's open, she's gone. And so that cow's got to breed back in a really harsh environment. And the reason that we're so tough on that is there's nothing. We can talk about all the premiums and all the things that work in the feed yard and the packing house and so forth, but there's nothing that can make a cow calf guy more money than a cow that will breed quickly. This past fall, we had 85% of our calves born in the first 30 days of the calving season.
Mm-hmm. And how long do you expect those cows to stay in production? What age?
We typically sell them as bred 11-year-old cows. So we think by that time they've probably functioned about as well as they can in this environment. And we know those cows will, if they can get into a better environment, they'll probably produce another 3 to 4 calves for someone. So they're still productive cows. They probably won't do that in our environment. And so we try to get them sold as bred 11-year-old cows.
Mm-hmm. So you've got that criteria to become a donor. Do you guys raise your own ET calves down there?
We do. You know, we'll take the lower end EPD of our cows. Those become our recip cows. And we're going to put one frozen embryo. We'll set those cows up, put one frozen embryo in. And then if it doesn't stick, we've got cleanup bulls behind them. So we still have a registered calf to merchandise.
Gotcha. So you're giving them one opportunity to take an embryo on your lower end cows.
Right.
Okay.
Because we run the ranch, just so everybody gets an idea, we run the ranch as much like we think a commercial operation or one of our bull customers would be running theirs. And so we've got one calving season. We wean everything on one day. We take all of our measures, weaning weights, yearling weights, all of those things on one day. And so we would expect that a commercial operation is doing very similar kinds of things.
Sure. And you've addressed the issue you got with predators. We know that we got to have cows with a maternal instinct to protect the calf. How does that work for you relative to cow temperament or tagging cow, or just explain how you handle that part?
You know, we spend, especially with the age I am anymore, docility is a really big thing with these cattle. And so we docility is part of that selection criteria. But the day she has that calf, don't try to score a docility score. Because she's going to protect that calf. Most of these cows will lay down, have a calf in less than 20 minutes typically. And typically within 30 to 45 seconds after that cow has a calf, she is up, and that calf's usually up within, 90 to 120 seconds trying to nurse the cow. And all of those things are really important in a tough predator environment.
Calf vigor, maternal instinct, and what you're saying is that a cow does not have to be nervous or have a bad docility in order to have a strong maternal instinct, is what you guys are seeing there.
You bet. You
I'm
bet.
not-
But
I'm not trying to speak for you, but
no, but and we know some of those cows, every year when she has a calf, you're just going to have some help getting that calf tagged and weighed, because she doesn't bluff, with that baby. Now, any other time we handle her and those kinds of things, they're very, very nice cows and very easy and gentle to handle. But that birthing process, they become really protected mamas.
that's a good point, and that's a key thing to learn out of an operation like yours, that we can have good docility, and still have a good maternal instinct in those. So relative to the toxic plants and cows learning to stay away from them, how does that selection process work for you?
Well, they kind of self-eliminate if they don't. But it's really interesting. The cows that have been raised here and the calves, I've never seen any of them graze or touch any of the toxic plants, except with the exception of Johnson grass but loco or any of the other silverleaf nightshades or bitter ragweed or any of those kinds of things that are toxic, they don't touch them. Johnson grass would be the exception. And the calves never do either, but we can bring cows in from the outside. And when we're in the type of year that we're in right now, where things are starting to green up, but the most green that we have is loco plants, those outside cows will graze on that loco.
Mm-hmm. How often are you bringing in cows from the outside?
We haven't in quite some time now, just because of the issues that we've had with bringing in cows from the outside. We tried it numerous times, and we never have been what I would call successful with it.
It makes sense. The natural selection process is taking care of those cows, keeping them away. We were talking before we actually began the webinar. You got to be tough on the cows. Do emotions ever come in play when it comes time to cull and things like that? I know you got this extensive database. How do you handle that part?
Well, it's hard to keep emotions out of this business, because we all get attached to these cows and the animals. But I guess running packing houses 35 years, we know the reason that we're raising the cattle, and if they're not going to perform, then they're not part of the process. And so we're just diligent about the selection criteria we make. If they don't perform, if they don't bring in a calf every year, if they don't, if they're open, we're just not going to keep the cow. And so, that whole process goes beyond just an open cow, because there's cows that will absorb a calf or abort a calf for some reason. They may not protect the calf from a predator. They might lose a calf, after we've branded, but before we wean. But any of those things cause us to get rid of that cow.
Any of them,
Any
no
of 'em.
exceptions.
Right.
So you've done a pretty good job eliminating the emotional part of it. They're held to a standard and you've arrived at a cow herd that works. I'm curious we've got hair shed EPDs that we've introduced here just in the past year on Angus cattle. And we talk about this environment you're in with temperature extremes. How would you describe the amount of hair, the hair shedding that exists in that cow herd?
Well, that's been a big deal to us, and we've recorded and tracked hair shedding for about 15 years now. We were one of the original herds that some work that was done by Mississippi State was done here, and we've continued to score those cows and turn that data into the association. So a big part of the initial database that the Angus Association would have come out of our herd. And it's really important to us that these cows are able to slick off, because with tough water, tough temperature changes and extremes, those cows have got to be able to slick off and survive. And anybody that was in the business in 2011 and 12 would remember those days. We had 110 days over 100 degrees and 45 days over 110. Those cows really only grazed between about 3 and 5 in the mornings because of the temperatures. And a cow to be able to survive, only grazing 2 or 3 hours a day and trying to shade up the rest of it takes a pretty unique individual. So the hair shed component, and it's the same for folks that, I know you'd have some folks in Northeast Oklahoma that would have a lot of fescue and so forth. It's the same kind of a deal on them, that they've got to be able to shed that hair pretty quick and pretty efficiently. And any of our customers down in South Texas would be, or Florida along the Gulf Coast would be the same way.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing cow? We're in early April. I can't speak for your temperature, but here in central Oklahoma, we've had a mild, warm winter. Are your cows starting to slick off yet, or is it something still to come?
No, they are starting to slick off. We branded replacement heifers yesterday, and you could sure begin to tell those that are really good and efficient at shedding hair. They're already pretty slick. Nearly all of our herd bulls that we have already slicked off and so forth. And so the cows are starting to slick off and shed hair. And, it's one of those things. Monday, I think we were 95, and yesterday morning we were 30 with about a 30-mile-an-hour wind. And so we're kind of in that phase right now where the cow's not sure whether she needs hair or doesn't need hair.
Right. So I'm curious on just a couple other like genetic value number type things. What kind of milk EPDs on your Angus are the range that works for you? Where do those need to stay?
We're kind of in that 24 to 28 milk EPD kind of range. We used to be lower than that, but that EPD is more of a maternal effect EPD than just an actual milk production EPD. And so we've had to kind of reevaluate and look at some cows that maybe have a 28 milk EPD, but when you look at the cow, she's not producing that much milk, but she is making a calf that is weaning heavy, and it's kind of fun to watch these calves and what mama teaches them, but they're grazing, they're out there doing on their own, and a lot of times it's more than just milk production.
Right. And I think people, again, I can't speak for everybody that's with us today, but we start talking about 24 to 28 milk EPDs in the environment that you're in. that might come as a surprise to some. I know if you told me it was 15 to 20 or 10 to 15, I wouldn't have been surprised given that production environment that you're in. But you've got enough fertility. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, if you get down on that low end, the extreme of that, a lot of times we produce calves that are just not very desirable. And, yeah, the cow stays in good shape and so forth, but that calf's probably not nearly as good as those calves where there is higher milk production. So the key for us is really putting the emphasis on fertility and breed back and not skimping any more than we absolutely have to on the milk side.
That makes sense. So what kind of heifer pregnancy EPDs are we looking at in your operation?
I think our average is about 11 and a half for an EPD today. And we're putting a lot of pressure on that. And our heifers, we're synchronizing those heifers on a 7-day cedar protocol. We're AIing them on a timed breeding deal one time, and then we're putting cleanup bulls behind them for 25 days. And we're doing that for those heifers to calve at about 22 to 23 months. So we're starting them very early, but we're picking our replacements out of those bred heifers. And so again, we're putting a lot of pressure on those heifers to breed, and don't know that I'm not sure maybe that there's a more important EPD that we look at now than that heifer pregnancy EPD.
Like when you identify some AI sires or herd bulls that you're selecting, what do you say that average in your herd's about 11 and a half? What are those bulls you're using heifer pregnancy EPD?
I probably would not use one under 12. If they're 17 or 18, I'm going to take a real hard look at, make sure there's not other holes in them that I can't stand. But that's a real key deal to us. And the $M index that the Angus Association has developed is very far from perfect, but it's a better tool than we've ever had to be able to try to help select maternal value in cows.
Mm-hmm. So you put value in that number. Where do you like to see it on your bulls?
Oh, I really like to see it in that above 70 range for sure. We're starting to see quite a few really, really good bulls that are in that $100 range.
So is it, let me hold off on that question. Where do you like to keep mature weight EPDs on your herd bulls?
We're trying to keep those under 50. I'd prefer to have them under 0 if I could, and we would have a lot of our cattle that are below 0, but certainly under 50.
Under 50. And what kind of birth weight EPD works for you guys?
Birth weight's really key to us because most of our customers are not going to see their cows when they're calving, and so they expect to be able to drive by and count calves. So our birth weight EPDs, we certainly wouldn't keep anything over a 2. Our average birth weight EPD in our herd today is a minus 1.5. And so, we think that's a really important component of our whole program, is being able to have calves that are lightweight, born easy, have a lot of vigor.
So as a birth weight tool, do you guys use CED in the selection process, that calving ease direct?
We do, and we think that's that's the other side of the equation, is not only do they need to have a light birth weight, but the cow's pelvis and so forth has to be such that they're going to have those calves with ease. And so eight's kind of a minimum for us. I'd prefer it to be at 10.
Mhm. You guys pelvic area measure heifers when you're deciding on what to keep?
We don't, and we did for a number of years, but we kind of, once we ran our correlations, we kind of figured out that we couldn't sort out age difference from pelvic measures, and that 45 days surprisingly can make an awful lot of difference in that pelvic measure when you take it. And so we think the calving ease direct number is probably a better indicator of that than actual pelvic measure.
Gotcha. And so what about a calving ease maternal EPD? You guys looking at that on those replacement heifers or herd bulls?
We are, and again, kind of eight's a cutoff number for us on that, and we think that number is every bit as important as the calving ease direct number.
Mm-hmm. Have you found it becomes useful in place of taking pelvic area measurements?
It really does. It really does.
It makes sense. So we're talking about those kind of parameters. Then what do you want as much of as you can get? How do you feel about weaning weight, yearling weight, marbling? How do those fit into the mix?
I'm going to start with marbling. Of course, spending a lot of time in a packing house, you would probably expect that. But one of the interesting things when we had our little packing plant here, I tell everybody it was a great laboratory, and one of the things that I learned in that plant, because we killed 125 head of cattle every day, that we knew the entire history of those cattle. And we found that typically cattle coming out of deserts had much higher marbling scores than cattle that came out of much better grass environments. And that was counterintuitive to me initially when I saw that, but after I spent some time thinking about it and realized that cows in desert environments have very short times of optimum nutrition. And so they've got to be able to take that optimum nutrition and store it up very quickly. The best way to do that is marbling or intramuscular fat, because it's the most transient fat in the body. And we've found that those cows that will maintain flesh and breed back are also the cows with the highest marbling scores. And so I've said for a long time that marbling may be a more important reproductive trait than it is a eating quality trait. So that one is very important to us. We try to select cattle that have high marbling. One of the things that we found is that marbling by itself tends to be antagonistic to muscle. And so, and if you look at cattle that we typically know are very high in marbling, take Wagyus, Longhorns, Holsteins, look at those cattle as a breed, Jerseys, they don't have very much muscle. And cattle that do tend to have a lot of muscle, Charolais, Piedmontese, go down that list, they don't have much marbling. And so I think in general, you can see those. So we try to find that happy medium, those cattle that can have muscle, because we're selling red meat. So we don't want to forget that piece of the business, but also have the marbling so that we pick up those reproductive traits as well as eating quality traits.
Right. And do you find it a challenge to identify AI sires to buy semen on to bring in that work in your operation?
It's a really big challenge. It probably shouldn't be, but every year when I go through all the databases of the available sires at the semen company and through the Angus Association data, I usually end up with a maximum of 2 or 3 that I think are worthy for us to use.
So do you end up using more bulls that you produce within your own? out of
We,
your-
we do, and we keep about, I've got 32 herd bulls here right now that, that we utilize, and I collect those bulls. And of course, part of that is to prove them out in calving heifers. But part of it is the fact that those bulls that we're keeping are going to be much more suited to our environment than just about anything we can bring in.
Makes sense. Now, and we've talked here in the last few minutes, and I'm asking you questions about Angus EPDs. Is there any difference relative to all these things that we've discussed, your mature cow size or where you put selection pressure on the Charolais side versus the Angus side?
There is, we handle the same, we handle the Charolais exactly the same from a reproductive standpoint. So they've still got to breed in 45 days, and if they're open, they're gone. So we keep that pressure on them. From my opinion, Charolais should be a terminal animal. We should be using them to produce red meat yield, and to grow as big and effective as we can. And if that's going to probably take a little bigger cow, they are an ox for a reason. They were really designed as work animals that we also harvested for food. And so it does, our cows are not nearly as small on the Charolais side as they are on the Angus side. They're not going to wean consistently 55 or 6% of their body weight. If we can get them to wean 48 to 50, we're comfortable that we got a pretty productive Charolais cow. We do try to put a lot of pressure on marbling in them. And certainly they're not going to marble like the Angus cows are, but we try to get as much marbling as we can in a Charolais cow. And they're in the same environments and those kinds of things as the Angus cow. So they're going to have a lot of the same criteria, but those cows are going to average weighing about 1450.
1450. So you're looking at weaning weights, you say about 48 to 50% of the cow's mature weight. So you're seeing more 700-pound adjusted 205s in a Charolais.
We are, yes.
What kind of marbling EPD on a Charolais? And we're talking a different database, but what does that number tend to be that works for you all?
We're trying to push it to 0.25 for Charolais. That's in the top 5% of the breed, but we think it's that important.
Anything else unique about the Charolais breeding program compared to what we've discussed on the Angus?
We're going to concentrate a lot more on growth. So typically our average weaning and yearling weight EPDs on those Charolais will be in the top 10% of the breed. Because we're trying to sell those bulls to be a terminal cross, and we think we ought to get as much pounds as we can produce that way.
Mm-hmm. So same challenges as far as when it comes to identifying an AI sire in the Charolais, or is it easier? Is it better? Is it worse? What's the situation there, James?
Well, again, it's pretty tough to come up with those. There's not nearly as much data on Charolais cattle as there is on Angus cattle. And so you're flying a little more blind with some of the traits, certainly the reproductive traits and some of those things with the Charolais cattle. And so there's a little more trial and error in that. And we're fortunate, we've got some cooperators on the Charolais side that have been doing it much longer than we have. And, they help educate quite a bit in some of that selection criteria and where some of the pitfalls are with some of those cattle. But it's probably a little more pedigree oriented with the Charolais than it is with the Angus, because there's just not as much data available.
Right. But from what you're describing, when you hold those cows to that standard of breeding up quick and having a calf every year, that selection process, that culling criteria you described, that you're holding those cows to that standard, that's going to take care of itself.
It does, and we've not been able to grow the Charolais herd nearly as fast as I would like to because of that. Because we end up, having a number of fallouts every year. But one of the things that I think that, it's certainly not scientific, but I think we've got pretty good anecdotal data on both Charolais and Angus cows, is I'm convinced that breeding is much more highly heritable than the statistics would show you that it is. I think there's so much noise in tracking that data because you've got different years with different nutrition, different weather events, different things that come into play. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can affect that, and it's hard to separate it out. But we're to a point today where nearly any cow that I have open, either Angus or Charolais, I can go back and I've had a mother, grandmother, sister, some pretty close relative that I've called for the exact same reason. And I rarely have a cow open that's coming from a line where all of those cows have bred year after year after year. And so it's either outside genetics or I've got a relative that I've called for the same reason.
That's interesting. And we typically talk about reproductive traits being low in heritability, but when we run cows, it does seem like there's certain cow families and pedigrees that you can see that issue happening more than others, but they tend to eliminate themselves. Again, there's a component of natural selection to that. So I've looked at the chat. We got a couple questions there, and it looks like Dr. Lallman has responded to one of them. And I'm curious, and I want to open this up, James, to you. What advice, you guys are living with something there, and now all of us, as the drought has moved across the United States and has really settled into Oklahoma, what advice do you give?
Well, the first thing is that you have a plan. We've always tried to plan ahead, but 2011, 12, we figured out we probably didn't have nearly a good enough plan in how we did things. But I think having a plan that says certain dates on the calendar, if certain things have not happened by that point in time, we need to make decisions and make things happen. It really doesn't matter what the weather forecast is for next week or 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out. If we hit that point, we have to make decisions about what we are going to do, because in all actuality, we love to talk about being cattlemen and cattle producers, but we're really grass farmers. And if we're not going to have grass production, we don't need something to harvest it. And it gets down to being really that simple. So we have to make some things happen now, depending on the value of the genetics and a lot of other things. You can make decisions to feed forages that you purchased, or you can move cattle to other locations, or you may do a lot of other things. But saving the grass that we have as our resource is our number one objective in what we do. And so, when you go back to the very basics of range science that says to remember that the growth below the ground of grasses is a mirror image of what's above the ground. If you only have a ½ inch above the ground, you've only got a ½ inch below the ground, and it's not going to survive very well in drought. So we try to let all of our grasses sometime during each and every year reach its maximum height. And so that way we know that we've got a root system underneath the ground that can survive those kinds of extremes. And we bank that grass accordingly. And so we're not going to let the cows overgraze those grasses. And that's the number one objective. So the advice is to lay out a calendar that says, you know, if these things happen by these dates, we need to respond some way and make those responses happen.
Makes sense. So you're talking, I'm assuming there's times you're going to early wean.
Correct?
I'm assuming you rotationally graze.
We are absolute believer in rotational grazing. I'm
But
not sure today how you can make money in a cow business and not rotational graze.
So you've got, what do you say, 16,000 acres and 600 cows.
Mhm.
So what your typical duration of grazing a paddock before you would move on, and how do you change that relative to severe situations or drought we're dealing with?
And I think that's probably one of the keys, is to not have a set grazing regime, because every year is going to be a little bit different. You know, if we've had fall moisture and winter moisture where I have a lot of forbs that have been produced, I'm going to probably graze something earlier in the year that I might not normally graze, trying to get those forbs consumed and put a lot of cow pressure on that, especially early in a growing season, to try to do that. If we didn't have those things, then, you know, I may not graze that until we've had a frost. You know, so every year I try to evaluate what do I have growing in what pastures. And of course, with that size acreage, I have some advantages that some other folks wouldn't, in that, you know, I rarely get consistent rainfall across the entire ranch. And so I'm going to have some areas that have gotten more rainfall, some that have gotten less, and I can make some of those adjustments where smaller operations don't have that kind of opportunity. But I really try to study what is my forage, what is my base there all the time, and how do I do that? And if I've got good subsoil moisture, I can probably come back and graze some grasses during the growing season, maybe in as short as 30 or 35 days. Where if I'm short moisture, it may be 45 to 60 days before I can get back to regrazing some of that in the growing season. And so it's really a study every year of what's my year look like, what's the last 12 months look like for me, and what pressures do I need to put where with the cows and so forth. And we may have some pastures that we don't graze at all in a 12-month time period.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely, you're managing daily, weekly, monthly relative to the health of that grass and what it's indicating to you is going on below the surface. And it's not a one size fits all thing. It's an active management process that you're constantly evaluating. Fair to say?
Absolutely. Fair to say. You bet. And you know, and we always try to have, you know, we don't typically feed cows hay in the wintertime. But, you know, in January, we had an 8-inch snow, and, you know, we were several days where the forage was covered up. And so we've got to be able to, at least on the younger cows and so forth, be able to get some forage to them during that kind of a time period. So, like I say, it's not typical for us to feed hay, but we've got to have some around us so that when those kind of events happen, that we can do that.
You've just made everybody in Oklahoma jealous talking about an 8-inch snow that you got in January.
It's been a long time since we've seen one of those, and it was really wet, so we're very fortunate.
We would, at this point in hindsight, we would have sure liked to have had that, but we're thankful we didn't burn through any extra hay that we didn't have a lot of as a result of it too.
I
So
understand.
I'm looking at chat questions. And it doesn't look like we got anything new there. I'm going to encourage everybody listening. If you've got a question for James, you'd like to type into the chat, feel free to do so, because we're nearing the end of our time, but we can go long if we need to, if we continue to have discussion and questions. James, I'm going to throw it back to you. I mean, you guys have implemented a very successful plan. You've made genetic improvements in cows that fit this environment that you got them in. What else do you want to share with us? What do you think is important to leave with all of us here today?
Well, I think the main thing that everybody in this business needs to understand is it is a business, and if you're wanting to operate it as a business, you need to look at all facets of the business, the grass, the reproductive efficiency, and really understand the math and how you measure things, and try to put it on the same basis all the time. We tend to do things in this business where we don't do our math on the same basis, and that doesn't work. And by that, I mean, if all of our input costs on a ranch are on a per acre basis, because we're putting fertilizer, herbicides, whatever input cost that we have, we tend to do that on a per acre basis, and we're pretty good at that. But yet we're looking at our revenue side on a per pound basis. That doesn't compute. We need to, if our input costs are gonna be on a per acre basis, our revenue needs to be on a per acre basis.
Mhm.
So we know how to measure that. And it's no different if you're a yearling operator and all your input costs are on a per head basis, but your revenue's on a per pound basis. That doesn't work either. And so, you need to put all of your input cost on a per pound basis, or your revenue on a per head basis, so we know how to manage that like a true business is.
Sure.
And some things like, shortening our breeding season can have huge effects on what we do and how. If we think about, if we're running a 120-day breeding season, a calf gains 2 pounds a day on its mama, that last cow to calf, her calf's 240 pounds behind that first calf, just because of when she bred.
Yes.
And in today's environment, that's $500 on that calf value across that. And so if I can get that down to 45 days, now I'm at 90 pounds or $200 instead of $500. That makes a huge difference in how we look at those things. And so really understanding those kinds of pressures and effects, and being able to do that math, and being able to put math on the same basis, so that we really understand our input cost and our revenues and how they match up. I think those are the most important things that we have to learn in the business.
I would agree. It's important to do. We have had a question come in on the chat. If you could talk a little bit about your virtual fencing.
We, I think that technology is finally here. I tried 20 years ago, a friend of mine and we built some ear tags that had speakers built into the ear tags, and we could actually make virtual fencing work. Today, I think we've got technology enough to where that can probably happen. But I think that we're not able to utilize it to this point from a standpoint of we've just not put together all the technology to make it happen. But I think that in the future, as we move more and more cow production into more and more marginal environments, because we're urban sprawl is eating up more and more of the really good productive land around, that's going to become more important because labor is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. So if we've got pastures that are, you know, a lot of our customers have 10,000 acre traps. To be able to go out and gather cattle on any given day takes a lot of labor to do that. If we can, with satellite technology and some of those kinds of things, make virtual fences where you can move those cattle over a period of days down to where the morning you go out to get them, they're within a half a mile of the pens. That's a pretty big deal. And we can also utilize for grazing and some of those kinds of things much more intensely than stringing hot wire and that kind of stuff. And so I think the opportunity is going to be tremendous over the next few years to utilize some of that and really make some big progress.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to check our chat box. We don't have any new questions. I would encourage anybody that's got something to please fire up in the chat box. Dr. Lawman, I'd open it back up to you if you've got a question for James. We've got a little bit of time left here.
Well, I would maybe just ask James to reiterate. I think one of the most impressive things he said, number one, is, you know, as he outlined the challenges they deal with in their environment there. And couple that with a 45-day breeding season and an 86% weaning rate is a tremendous record. That is an accomplishment. Congratulations. And James, do you want to speak any further about what it took to get there and maybe where you came from before you arrived at that point?
Calves weaned to cows exposed. The national SPA data on that says that number is 78%. Has been for 40 years. And when we first started to collect that data ourselves, by gollies, we were at 78% too, and weren't very proud of that. So we really embarked on how do we change that, and to the last 2 years, that number's been at 86%. On an operation our size, that's 40 additional calves with no additional overhead. And 40 calves is a big deal. That pays a lot of bills in what we do and how we do it. And so it's like everything else. It's understanding the number, and then how do we focus on improving that number, and what does that take? So it may mean that if we've got a calf that was born in 20-degree weather and freezing rain or some of those kinds of things, we may have to bring it in and put it in the barn and warm it up and you know, get it on its feet and back with its mama so that it becomes a productive calf. But we don't just lose that calf out there because we didn't pay enough attention to take care of it. And you know, there's a 1,000 of those kinds of scenarios that can happen if we've got a little scour running through calves or those kinds of things, making sure we treat them today and not wait and see if it's okay tomorrow, kind of a thing, to make sure that calf makes it. But every one of those calves that comes in is a big deal. And so we put a lot of effort into making sure that we do that. And part of that is we pay our employees an incentive from that base rate of calves. As we pick up those percentages, we've got a bonus program laid out that you know, if we wean 100% of the calves that we branded, they get X amount of bonus. And if it's one less than that, or two less than that, or three less than that, that bonus goes down. from that. And so everybody has some skin in the game in what we're doing and how we do it. And it's amazing when everybody has skin in the game, how much better we can be at some of those things.
Very interesting.
That is a good point. And we had a question come in on the chat. Can you tell us what your nitrate and sulfate levels are in that water?
Oh, gosh. I've not looked at it in a while. They would, I will say this, typically when we run analysis on the water, it comes back with crossbones on it. So it's plenty high. I mean, you're not going to drink it yourself and make it home. Let me put it that way. But I've certainly, I should have looked at that data before as to what it is. But what we have had to do is spend a lot of time. We use chelated minerals in our loose mineral. We use injectable minerals to get into the cattle. We've really worked on trying to get minerals to where the cow can absorb and use those minerals, and they don't get tied up with the sulfates and nitrates that are in the water. And that's been it's been a real challenge. We've probably spent 20 years working on mineral issues around here, but there's not much of a way to increase some of the fertility things and hair shed and a number of the other issues that we've had without getting proper mineral absorption into the animals. And so that's been a real key for us.
Mhm.